Hello and welcome to On the Kerbs Pub Chat. In this spin-off series, I'll be tackling a topic each episode from the world of motorsport and doing it with at least one friend from my international pub. And in case you didn't know, I am Team Albus Daily, and for the first episode of this On the Kerbs Pub Chat episode, I am joined by the one and only Mr. Jacob Phillips. How are you?
Good evening, Timo. I'm doing fantastic, thank you. And thank you for inviting me into your pub. As you know, and some of the listeners might know already at home, I do love a pub. So it's great to be here enjoying a conversation over a pretend pint with you, Timo.
We'll do what we can until we can find ourselves a real pub that's close to both of us. But in the meantime, we are now here to chat about the F1 calendar for this first episode. And it's something we've both got our grievances with. Let's not beat around the bush. And thanks to the early announcement from F1 this year, we can compare and contrast the 2023 and 2024 calendars. Spoiler alert, we're not a big fan of both. And also delve into what other changes we'd make, what we'd like to see in the future, and things like how many Grand Prix are too many. So, Jacob, shall we just get straight into it?
Let's dive straight into it and do what we can to stay as positive as possible.
That will be a challenge, but we'll endure. So I'm just going to run through the 2023 proposed calendar, what we should have had this year, and we'll get some thoughts on that straight away. So we all know this at home, but just quickly to run through it. Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Baku, Miami, Imola, Spain, Canada, Austria, Britain, Hungary, Belgium, Zandvoort, Monza, Singapore, Japan, Qatar, Austin, Mexico, Brazil, Vegas, and Abu Dhabi. Obviously, Imola didn't happen because of the flooding. And but it's still 21 races on the grid this year. Thoughts?
Too many is what I'd say. That's my first sort of overarching theme there. I mean, we'll go back to the glory days, Timo. We like to reminisce about the past and look at it with our rose-tinted specs on. And when we started watching F1, which was way back when, 15 years plus now, I think we had about 18, 16 to 17, 18 being sort of the round figure there that Bernie proposed. And they seem like very good seasons. You didn't have to commit every weekend, which seems like we have to now.
Mm-hmm.
And it just leads to, bring on to the first point, really. The first sort of my main criticism is it leads to, obviously, we talk about the drivers and the teams. They have, several different mechanic teams now and journalists, reporters, and even catering staff that the teams have to provide. They have to bring several teams now because it's fatiguing for them. But us as fans and as journalists and whatever else, it's tiring. I mean, maybe partly to do with the product that we're receiving. I think we've talked about that plenty of other times. We don't need to touch on that now because it's a whole different topic. But 24 races next year, 22. I think this year it's far too many, and it just seems like every year that will creep up. So next year, potentially 25. That's been rumoured. I remember when Bernie announced 20 and everyone was like, oh, bloody hell, Bernie, you're doing it again. You're increasing the calendar. You're no good for the sport. And we thought 20 was way too much. And here Liberty Media come along and we have 24. And yeah, it's way too much for me, Timo, way too much.
I want to go back to a little bit to what you were saying there about having to commit every weekend to it. It does definitely feel like it. And that's why I generally, and still for the moment, prefer the second half of a season because after summer break, you do generally have a double or a triple header. Last year was triple header, I think. This year it's just double header, thankfully. And then once you get out of Europe and you go for these Singapore, Japan, Qatar kind of races, because of the time difference for us at least, because obviously we're both in Europe, so we kind of have to approach it from that perspective it doesn't feel as bad because it's either you're just losing a morning or an evening, but you've got the entire day still to do most of what you'd be doing at the weekend anyway. Whereas the problem with the majority of the rest of the calendar is that your afternoon is just gone and your morning's probably gone because of feeder series if we're watching that, which obviously we are. And then you get to the evening and you're just kind of exhausted really from all of it, and you're not really up for doing much else unless you're really enticed to do something. So I think that's an interesting issue because every other time zone is awkward to watch it in. I think, especially you look at the Middle East, the Far East, then Australia, and then you go the other way with South America and North America. They've got them either early on in the morning, too early on in the morning in Australia's case, but they've still got a lot of weekend left to them. So it's kind of you either get up early-ish and commit, but then you've still got the rest of the day. You could go for a little nap, or it's on too early or too late, and you will just have to watch it and catch up the next day. So it doesn't impact them as much, I feel like. But for us, it does get quite exhausting, I think, in Europe. And that is one of the things where if we look at the European races, we like most of them, but we don't need all of them. And even so, if you take the calendar from this year, April, yes, we were meant to have something there originally. I think it was China before that was obviously cancelled, and Imola obviously got cancelled as well. But it was this weirdly long break where we were then having races stuffed together back to back to back later on. And you're like,
I don't know
you
about
could
you,
at least
Timo,
spread
but
it out a little bit.
I enjoyed that break. I think
I enjoyed that
not,
break as well, but you see that it's kind of there was this space to be utilised, and you could have at least had one Grand Prix in there, and that was it, just to
well, considering
ease it slightly later.
considering F1 love money and they love adding more races here, there, and everywhere. I'm surprised that Stefano Domenicali and his and friends, let's say, didn't put another race there for sort of to you know become a cash cow or go wherever and get a little nice hefty fee off it. So that was weird. Certainly, that didn't help in terms of the momentum of the season. I personally enjoyed
No,
the
it's
break
felt
because,
very disjointed, hasn't it?
well, we went from Bahrain to Saudi, which went by in a flash. Bit disappointed about them. Then to Australia, which was, in my opinion, an absolute. I'm going to say the word mess before I say anything stronger. And then we had a month's break basically until Baku, which was for me underwhelming. And then we went straight to Baku, which will bring us onto another problem later in terms of distances. That was a bit of a weird one. Baku straight to Miami, and then we had the break again another month before we went back to Monaco. I think
Mm.
Monaco or Spain, Monaco, something like that. And then you're in
Monaco
that
and Spain, I think, this time around.
Monaco and
Or it's
Spain,
hard to
yeah.
keep
And
track at
then
this point.
oh, it really is. I don't know. Forget what races we've seen and haven't seen, to be honest. But we went to Monaco, went to Spain, and then we're in that really weird period whereby, yes, I know it's better for us that we can watch it, but tiring in the sense that, I love the feeder series, especially Formula 3, although Formula 2 has been very good as well this year. Their early starts for us, sometimes it can be as early as 6 a.m. The Grand Prix doesn't start till 2 or 3 sometimes, depending on the country. So that's a whole day given up. It's almost quite hard to do something between 9, 10 o'clock when F2 finishes and then start the race around 2 o'clock. But we're in that, and also it's sort of every weekend. I mean, we got Spa this weekend. We had just had Hungary. We've just had before that Austria and Silverstone back to back. And then we have a nice summer break, which for me again is probably going to be needed, and I think the teams will agree with that as well. But then it's Zandvoort, Monza, but then, like you say, it does get a bit nicer. You're in Singapore, which is still sort of our time, but then Japan, that's perfect for me. I mean, I'm a teacher outside of motorsport, and for me, I wake up very early, so for that race, that's absolutely perfect for me. I can get up at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whenever it is, watch the race, and then I've got the whole day to do whatever I can. And after that, we've got Qatar, which is 6 o'clock in the evening, and Austin, which is, I think, 9 o'clock at night. So you can do everything with your day, do whatever you want to do, have a nice Sunday roast in the evening, then turn the F1 on. So, yeah. But going back to the original point, yeah, there's too many races. And I think for me, the ideal number would be 18 to 20 if we were pushing it, depending on what circuits I think we had.
I will use my trident, and I'm on about the fork and not the F2 team here to tackle your points there and go for the fact that I realised that when I was listing off the Grand Prix just now, I did somehow forget Monaco in there, so it was meant to be 23 races this year. But
How did you forget that? Good.
oh, I have no idea. I just must have missed that in typing up the list. But that's clearly been going too hard in the pub already before you got here. We're making this list up.
Cheers.
And then this other point of later on in the season is also preferable because aside from Abu Dhabi and this year Kota, there isn't any feeder series. So I wonder if that is part of the problem as well. The spacing of all these races is that the feeder series are stuffed in with the F1 quite early doors. And if their calendars were spread out a little bit more, or maybe you don't have F2 and F3 on the same weekend, you have one and the other, maybe interchanging, there's less time to commit to it. And that way you're feeling less exhausted there as well. And to round it up, I think 19 was my magic number for getting there perfect between 18 and 20 there as well. But again, it's this kind of thing of less is more and you want the quality, not the quantity. But Liberty and Dominicali in particular seem determined to just keep ramping and ramping and ramping. And if you take a year like this, where Max and Red Bull generally are just winning every race, it just gets exhausting on a whole other plane of existence, essentially, that it all becomes overwhelming. So it's hard to know where to even go from there.
Yeah, it's very tiring. I'm almost a broken man every Sunday evening. But yeah, it does. I think on the flip side to maybe mentioning what you mentioned there about the feeder series, I think it can sometimes provide a little bit of joy, in a weekend where F1 might not be
Hmm.
so good. But I think obviously they've got a few issues around sort of money as well. It's going to cost them more to potentially fly over to the flyways. I think they've been to Singapore a few times, but to fly away to Brazil, Las Vegas, maybe it costs them more money. I don't know, but it would be nice, I think, for them to spread out a little bit more. We've seen it now with Australia, which
I was going to say the
was
counter for that would be they can go to Monaco, they can go to Saudi, Australia. They could maybe, instead of doing those, go to Japan or Singapore or something. We saw a W Series in
I think
Singapore.
that'd be
They were meant
amazing.
to be in Kota, Mexico, so it's doable.
I mean, it would be amazing when to see a Iwasa win in Japan would be absolutely amazing. But like they say, they went to Australia this year. Apparently, that was good. But I actually managed to miss all of that through me falling asleep and messing up my sleep schedule for that weekend. But yeah, it is Liberty cramming in too many, and I think it comes down to a certain business model. Actually, we've got 24, 25 races now, and I think that whereby when we had 18, I think at 18, that round number there, I think as a diehard fan, which I would certainly consider myself, and I think you would as well, Timo, you can commit to that number. That's still, my math is very bad, but what, 30 odd weekends a year that you do not have to commit? Now it's around half of the year, and some of those are triple headers, so that's 3 weekends in a row. And I think what F1 and Liberty, certainly Liberty itself, are doing, and maybe attracting the casual fan. So you've got races like Silverstone, for example. Everyone watches Silverstone. Everyone loves Silverstone. You've got Monaco, whereby not everyone loves Monaco. It's a bit controversial. It's like Marmite. We love Monaco, but the casual fan might not watch Monaco. And then you've got Miami, where, let's be honest, we don't really care about Miami. We're going to watch it because we're, married to the sport, for want of a better term. But the casual fans will also be attracted because you've got Flow Rider there. You've got all these celebrities. I'm not very much in tune with musical celebrities anymore. That's going back a bit there, Flow Rider. But it tracks that Drive to Survive, sorry, Netflix crowd. But I think that's what they want to do. They want a different race for a different person. So you don't have to commit to the whole season. But hey, we've got 1 million viewers for this race, but it's fine because next week we'll attract 3 million when we go to Las Vegas. We don't really care about you diehard fans anymore. You've got Silverstone in the middle of the season, and I think that's where they're trying to go about it, and that's why year on year on year, I think maybe as diehard fans we sort of roll over and take it a little bit because we do love the sport that much. We're vocal about it, but there's nothing that we can do about it. And where do we go from here, really? I mean, what is for you, Timo? What do you reckon realistically the ceiling is? I think we're over that, but Liberty don't deal in cents. So where do you think they're going to stop it? I mean, I won't be surprised if we get to, dare I say it, 26 maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where what can we do about it aside from airing out our dirty laundry in the pub like this and just kind of having a bit of a go at them? It's important that we can do stuff as fans, and that's evident in the 2024 calendar a bit, which we'll get to in a second. But I think 25 has to be the absolute maximum, but also it shouldn't even get to that in the first place for me. It should be maximum 22 in the first place, and even that's pushing it a little bit. I still think the ideal number is 19, 20 at a push. But one of the other reasons that we have a bit of a grievance with the calendar generally is just, as you alluded to earlier with Baku and Miami, is the way they go about navigating the globe. And
It's
doesn't make sense either. And some of the pressure that the fans have been able to put on them has resulted in some regionalization of the calendar for next year. But that does very much seem like F1 and Liberty going, okay, here's what we've tried to do here, and essentially it's the bare minimum, and seeing if they can get away with it by branding it as, look at these massive changes we've made, which I'll read through the calendar for next year, and I'm pretty sure I've got all of the venues this time. And this is the order in which we will go. So it'd be Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Japan, China, Miami, weirdly, Imola, Monaco, Canada, Spain, Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, Belgium, Zandvoort, Monza, Baku, Singapore, Austin, Mexico, Brazil, Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, which there is some improvement there, but still seems very weird. The Miami and Canada being the immediate outliers there. And then if you look closely in Europe as well, there's a weird way of going about that where you go Austria to Britain to go back to Hungary, where it's essentially next door to Austria,
yeah,
to then go up to Belgium, to go to Zandvoort, to go down to Monza when you could have already done that in the Austria-Hungary section.
it,
So it's still a little bit messy, but I suppose it may be as we try to stay optimistic about this, Jacob, there is a bit of hope there that we're able to get some changes implemented here, and maybe they're more willing to listen moving forwards.
I think there's a tiny bit of hope. I mean, just a little bit of calendar admin here. If you haven't already heard the news that Bahrain and Saudi are going to be on Saturdays, on the respective Saturdays when they are. I think it's 2nd and 9th of March due to Ramadan. So that'd be the first Saturday race, effectively actually since Vegas, although in the UK it's still a Sunday race. As a Sunday, but we would have Saturday races back in the 80s, so it's not exactly breaking tradition there. But is there hope for the calendar? There's slight hope. I mean, Singapore and Azerbaijan, I think they're sort of in the right parts of the world or similar parts of the world. Certainly, you can fly down Singapore from Baku. It might be refreshing actually for Baku to be at a different point of the year. I mean, I actually kind of going off Baku, which I'll touch on a bit later, but I know it's still a bit of a fan favourite there. The one that sort of concerns me really, which you actually mentioned a second ago, which not many people recognise, but Austria and Hungary are right next to each other. The Austro-Hungarian Empire from way back when, if you paid attention in history. We don't ever seem to go from Austria to Hungary, which we should. We go to Austria, fly or get a boat or whatever we do across to Silverstone, and then we're back on a boat or a plane back to Hungary. To then go straight to Belgium, okay, but then Zandvoort is literally an hour away from Spa, or hour and a half if you want to at a push. But we go there a month later, which in a way has the calendar got worse because of that, because they always used to be back to back. I was doing a bit of research on this actually, and I don't know how true it is. I need to run my numbers a bit more carefully, but apparently the calendar is only 7% more sustainably effective, which sounds like scientific jargon, so I'm not going to go into that too much and pretend I'm a doctor, but it doesn't sound like much.
It's one of those things that doesn't, it can't be accurate, but also you wouldn't be surprised if it got verified.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was slightly inflated to be something more like 4%. But,
optimistic, Jacob. You're meant to be optimistic.
I know. Yes, I know. I've quickly changed my tact. I mean, there's room to improve, and obviously there are certain things around the calendar that are slightly harder to change. I know that Canada is a bit of a sticking point team, and I think that you've told me this many times that they have a contract, or certainly in the day they actually received a contract, and I think they have one of the longest standing contracts in F1. I think it's due to go till 2031, and that started back in the Eccleston days. And I think that it was agreed that, you might want to correct me on this, but agreed that it always happens around that weekend and it's hard to move.
Yeah,
and Canada don't want to
yeah, I'm not sure the reasoning why it's hard to move. Probably just a lot of money that they can't be bothered outspending whatever that amount was to change it to a different point in the year. But you'd even think if you have to go to Miami then, which you don't really, but if Canada's fixed in place, why not move Miami a bit closer to it instead of going back to Europe and then going back over there? It's a small change, but again, maybe it knocks things up 1%, and it could help in that regard.
If you were big Stefano Dominici, you had your F1 Liberty hat on, and you're trying to be a bit rational about it, what would you rather do? What do you think would be better for the calendar? Would you move Miami next to Canada in June, or would you say to Canada, I'm sorry, you've had this contract for years, but we're in charge now. You've got a lot of money behind you. You're going to then go up next to Miami in early mid-May. I mean, what do you rather do? I think there's a few weather considerations as well, but
I'd stick Miami next to June in an ideal world, because then you'd still mark it as we're kicking off the summer with an American doubleheader, and you've kind of got a good summer thing you can play on there with the marketing side of it, and it just sunshine in Miami. It's already going to be sunshine probably anyway, but you've got a nice thing over there. It just makes more sense logistically. You can make a whole road trip out of getting from Miami to Canada as the drivers and the teams, and you can have all this fun content to go there. All the drivers love going to New York anyway, so why not have a tie-in event maybe there that they could be part of? There's so many different things that you could do with that from a marketing perspective that just tie Europe together. And you kind of like, if I look back at the calendar there, the start of it, you're in the Middle East and the East in general. You've got a nice thing from a marketing thing there. It's kind of, from a narrative point of view, then you tiptoe into Europe a little bit, maybe if you do go to Imola, or you do what we're going to do in a minute, and you just get rid of Imola completely, and you go and you have maybe Monaco because it makes sense as a little pit stop, and then you go over to back to the Americas, or you move Spain up a little bit, and if you have to, at least you've got Monaco and Spain doubleheader. You don't have this kind of weird thing of one on, one off, one on, one off. You've got Miami, Imola, Monaco, Canada. Why not just, for this instance, Imola, Monaco, Miami, Canada, and it doesn't fix the issue, but it makes it a little bit more smooth there for me. And then you can come back to Europe and go off and do the rest of the summer there.
Yeah, because you said Spain move up, but actually Spain's actually moved down for next year. It was 4th of June this year. Used to be around sort of mid-May before
Yeah,
Monaco, but
yeah.
they're going a month later next year. But yeah, it just seems very odd,
Are
doesn't
up
it?
and down to the wrong way. We're a different way around there, I think, in how we look at that.
Yeah. Imola, obviously I think it was cancelled due to freak weather events, so there's no chance it'll probably be off next year, but we'll get rid of that one anyway. We'll come on to that. And
Yeah, I
maybe an
mean,
asterisk.
it goes the question there of how many Grand Prix are too many, which we've already kind of answered there, which would be 25. But I mean, we're already on 24 next year if it all happens. So we're getting very close to that bubble and essentially over it. It'll be very interesting to see. It very much depends on what the kind of season we have next year as well to see if we think that 24 is too many. We're obviously thinking 22 is too many this year because it's just Red Bull, Red Bull, Red Bull. Um, but it does. Do you think that if we had a 2021 style season next year, or a 2012 style season, maybe, if throw it way back, would we be more accepting of 24 races? Because, like, yes, this is box office. This is actually box office every week now.
I was actually going to ask you the exact same question. So great minds think alike. You stole my question. How dare you? If we got a 2021 season, and that's the thing, if it's box office every week, yes, but I have a certain dislike for Mexico. I don't think it's a very good track for racing. I don't think it's a great track for racing in any series, but that's just my opinion. If it was a box office season, would I still be geared towards a Miami Grand Prix, for example, as well? If we have a 2021 season, am I going to want to watch Miami anyway because the racing might still be bad there? But at the same time, on the flip side, and we don't know this yet because we haven't had a really competitive season since going to Miami, would it reinvigorate or sort of ignite that circuit? So I think it would help, certainly. I don't think we'd be in a situation whereby, like, even this weekend, I said to Timo sort of, after the Hungarian Grand Prix, it's Spa this weekend, and that should be an absolute, it's Spa. Come on, guys, it's Spa. It's one of the best tracks. And I think it still is, but it's no guarantee the race is going to be good. And I'm not looking forward to it as much as I would have done. I mean, last year I actually went to Spa, which was great, but the race wasn't very good anyway. But yeah, I'd say verging on sitting on the fence to your question, but verging towards yes. I think it certainly would help, but I don't know if I'd still be like, yay, we got 24 races, even if it was spectacular. But I might be wrong. I might really enjoy it, but I think we have to get to that point first to actually find out.
Yes, definitely. But
Which is
say regardless if we get to, say in this scenario, we have 24 races next year and it's been incredible, but we don't enjoy it as much as we should do because we're just exhausted from spending so much time committed to this. Which Grand Prix would you get rid of? We've got a list between us here, and it's a very similar list, but with one or two interesting differences there. So I'll let you go for the common ones that we've got between us, and then we can go for our slight divergences.
No prize for guessing. We have already mentioned it. So we have both decided to get rid of Imola. And people might be saying, oh my God, how dare you? Imola's a classic track. It's got heritage from way back when. It's an old style circuit with walls and gravel traps. We like that kind of thing. But I don't think it really suits the racing that we have. It was better in 21, but with these new cars, we only had one race. But even then in 21, it wasn't very good. Last year's race was an absolute snooze fest. And I think the real litmus test for it is how good the feeder series is. If the F1's bad, you think, okay, F1's not in the greatest place at the moment. But if the feeder series are good, okay, it could be a good track. But I think you'll agree with me, Timo, that even last year the feeder series wasn't very good there. And I think,
it wasn't the most enjoyable from memory.
No, I don't remember what happened, to be honest.
All I remember is Nissany crashing, and that was about it, and Fittipaldi getting on the podium. But at the same time, Nissany crashing doesn't narrow it down for races.
That could be any one of the last 3 seasons, Timo. I mean, it might not be Imola, but I do remember him crashing on the pit straight. I think it was. Also, we've got, I know America's got 3. Is that too many for America as well? Potentially, but they are a bigger country. But maybe that's a different point for another day. Do we need 2 races in Italy when we've already got Monza? The answer to that question is no. And another point I'll raise now, just going slightly off piste here, going back to a previous point, is we go from Italy, northern Italy as well, to say the very least, in May, to going to another part of northern Italy in September.
September.
I mean, very weird. I mean, why don't we just have them back to back? I mean, maybe it would kill maybe I don't know, momentum or excitement because you have two Italian races back to back. But we had it in COVID, and those races weren't so bad, and no one seemed to mind that. So I don't know. Imola for me is a see you later. Not interested in that. Another one actually, which sort of keeping to a similar trend that we've both gone for, is another classic track in Zandvoort, and one for me that just doesn't get me very excited, even though we've got banked corners and sort of elevation changes and gravel. I mean,
It's
there's no
another
way
one of
that we're
those
going to
tracks.
see
There's a
overtake.
lot of potential there, but it hasn't really materialized in the races too much over the ones that we've had there so far. It just kind of, again, maybe it's the size of the cars. Feeder series as
The
well have
cars,
difficulty with it as well, and it's just more of a procession there, and it doesn't seem like you're really getting much out of it.
the problem with Zandvoort is, and we find it, and it's why Silverstone's probably arguably for me the best circuit is. There's multiple racing lines around Silverstone, and that really helps. Zandvoort is one racing line, which we find on a lot of circuits, but the track is so narrow that if you go slightly offline, you're going to get marbles on your tires and your race is destroyed, or you're going to end up in the gravel, and those gravel traps are deep. Certainly not ones like we see on other tracks where you can get out of them. If you go in those gravel traps, you're out of the race. And that's certainly in this day and age, that's not what you want. You're there to get points really to sort of solidify a good race. So we just don't see a lot of action there at all. There's potential there for absolute carnage, which, doesn't make a good race. Does it not make a good race? That's another point again from the day. But in the two races we've had there, I can't remember anything that I've enjoyed barring, Mercedes strategy, but that strategy, not really the track. Also, it's, Max's home ground, nothing against Max. He's doing a fantastic job at the moment.
It
It's
is,
it's
again, it's
boring.
one of those reasons, though. Then the reason we have the likes of Zandvoort, Mexico, and Miami are just because for Miami, F1 now popular in America. Zandvoort, Max, Mexico, Checo. It's
Right.
nice to have those, but that doesn't make the track good. And
No.
doesn't mean the racing is going to be good because maybe the track is good, but it's just the racing with this category is not excellent. So it's we saw F1 Academy. Well, we didn't see F1 Academy, but F1 Academy was there
We would have
earlier
liked to have
this
seen
year.
it.
We would have liked to see it this year, but from what I could
Maybe,
understand from what I heard from it, it was a good race, and those cars suited it pretty well. So it's potential. It's just maybe not for F1, and that's okay. I think sometimes it's everyone's so obsessed with being a Formula One track and being up to standard for that, but it's okay to not have that. You look at Portimao, and that worked nicely as an F1 track, but it works better as a European Le Mans track, and you get great racing there as a result of that. So
exactly.
I think there needs to be less of a focus on F1 is the be all and end all pinnacle that as a racetrack you want to get to because you've got all these other excellent categories that will happily go racing around you instead, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I think we might get, our wish might be granted Timo much in the future. I think once Max does leave, which potentially could be earlier than we think, I think that Zandvoort won't be on the calendar anymore because the Dutch government, and they've already had some problems around it as well, trying to secure funding, the environmental problem. I think it's seen as a sort of a bad image for the country, but because of the Max sort of the hype, if you like, they'd be very stupid not to have a race. But once Max goes, I think that'll be the end of Zandvoort as an F1 track. Still a circuit they'll use for other things, but I can't see F1 going there. Maybe similar to Mexico once Checo leaves. Will they have the funding for that? Will they bother about it as much? I'm not so sure. Which brings us on to Mexico as well, which is another track that we'd get rid of, Timo. And I'll ask you about this one. Why don't you like Mexico, and why, like me, would you get rid of Mexico?
Such a loaded potential question there of why do you not like Mexico, team? I was like, no, the country is a lovely place, Jacob. Let's not be going down there. But the
Mexican
track
Grand Prix
that we
or the
use,
Mexico?
um, yeah, it's just one that aside from Ricardo last year, there wasn't really anything there. And I know it's not Formula One, but Formula E had a race there earlier this year and had one last year there as well. And Formula E is excellent. It's just every track it goes to, more or less, there is excellent close to close racing, and you couldn't ask for much more from it. But Mexico, it just doesn't translate over. And I feel like if, like you say in the feeder
Horrible.
series, if Formula E can't do it, then what chance does F1 have with bigger, bulkier cars? So for me,
No.
it's just it's not there. It's got some nice memories attached to it with iconic moments from the sport, but in terms of racing itself, there's not much there to it. I mean, Lewis did secure a couple of titles there, but you don't remember it being an exceptional race. You just remember him doing what he needed to do and being Lewis and getting the job done. Um,
Yeah.
So it's a shame because it's got a lot of potential. The high altitude makes for a fun difference, but it doesn't really do much, unfortunately, for me in terms of the on track racing. But does bring up an idea I want to discuss with you in a second, which is something that's already been muted out in the ether of why not have alternative races? 1 year it's Mexico, 1 year it's somewhere else, and maybe that's what it needs to rejuvenate it slightly. Going from one track to another, not necessarily one in Mexico and it's swapped for another one in Mexico, but maybe you go Mexico 1 day, 1 year, and you go somewhere else in Central or Southern America the following year. A little bit of a rotation. Like there was some suggestion for other tracks that we're maybe some on this list. Maybe instead of doing Vegas every year, you do it 1 year, you go to Miami the next, and you kind of try and really amp it up that way. And again, from a marketing perspective, it's a good idea because you can just really show it as it's only live once kind of thing, but even more so because you don't know if you're going to guarantee another viewing of that for at least another 2 years. Um, so that's one potential for it, but and it's also something that I think we've said about with regards to the Middle East. There's 4 races there. Do we really need 4? You've put Qatar down as one you want to get rid of. I've put possibly Saudi Arabia. Only reason I didn't put Qatar is because I enjoyed the race that we had there in 21. I'm intrigued to see what we get this year before making a further judgment on it. And for me, Saudi Arabia is just it's it's entertaining, but it feels very on the edge of what you can get away with in motorsport and was designed to it feels like it was designed to be dangerous rather than exciting.
Yeah, I do agree with that, and that's maybe why I've kept it on there, maybe quite cynically. That I thought it does provide a little bit of drama, although this year again wasn't very good. I think I just chose to put Qatar there because I suppose I know they were there in 21 as sort of like a one-off tester trial event, I think. But they're coming back full time this year for a 10-year deal. I think I put it on there because, they're the last to join the party. And I did actually enjoy 21, as you say, but I don't know, it was a toss up between Saudi and Qatar. I just, chose to put down Qatar. But that could be one that, you mentioned there about the rotation. That could be one potentially that could be rotated as well. 1 year we go to Saudi, 1 year we go to Qatar. So yeah, that might be an idea.
I think at this point it's assumed you're going to keep Bahrain and Abu Dhabi at the start of the season respectively, which I don't mind. But again, it's this thing of do you need them to both be double header finales in the desert kind of thing or double header start to the season? Not really. You can just go and move elsewhere immediately. But the one thing I'm intrigued about on your list there, I know we've had a couple of dull races, but Baku's on your hit list.
It is on my hit list. So going through the list now, maybe I don't know. I'm trying to think. Was I maybe too quick to judge? But I think based on my recent enjoyment and the race itself hasn't been that good. It's also in an area that just feels, or not necessarily an area. The city looks actually quite nice. I'd love to visit the city, but in terms of the race itself, it doesn't have that big race feel about it. And although F1 and Liberty are plugging that, I do think it can help the atmosphere sometimes. We are seeing races now, for example, like Spa this weekend, which we packed out. Silverstone broke a attendance record. Austria broke an attendance record. Spain had a record attendance. There's no one really in the grandstands. I think the novelty's worn off for me. At the start, it was a very good race. I mean, we all look forward to Baku, but did we look forward to it for the wrong reasons? You think 2017, 18, 21? Memorable moments, Max crashing into Ricardo, or was it Ricardo into Max? I can't quite remember. We had Max's tyre failing on the pit straight 2 or 3 laps from home. We had the crazy 2017 race where, cars went over debris. Lance Stroll was on the podium. That's not a thing you hear every week, but I think the novelty's worn off. And I think in a Williams, no doubt, yeah, no less. And I think the novelty's worn off, and it's something to do with the new rules. Now, the new rules are meant to make overtaking easier. I mean, the cars can follow, fine. They can't overtake as well as you think they should. And we are actually seeing now reduced overtakes. Sorry to Timo to go on a negative point here, but it's quite crucial to the point I'm going to make about Baku. Baku was only good because of A, the carnage, and that can happen in any era, but B, the slipstream you got down the back straight. Now, with these ground effect cars, it's very, very hard to, generate slipstream, which is why we barely see any overtakes in Baku anymore. Until they change the rules again, I think we'll see a better race there. But down the back straight, it's very hard to make an overtake. It's also one of the only places you can make an overtake, unless you want to be ballsy about it. And it just means you get a follow the leader style race. And if no carnage happens, it's going to be one of the most boring races of the season. And it's something similar I think you'll find at Monza as well this year. We started seeing it last year. Monza wasn't a great race. I think this year as well. If the slipstream doesn't work as well there with the new ground effect rules, then we might see actually a boring race. So that's why I'm going to get rid of it. Slightly controversial. I know some people will be coming for me in the comments saying, "How dare you get rid of Baku? You know, Baku's one of the best circuits." But for me, it's one of them had to go, so I thought, why not get rid of Baku? It might be controversial, team. I don't know what your thoughts on what I just said there, but yeah, that is one.
You make a solid case for it. It just makes me think again. There's more of an argument for this rotation thing, and leads into the next section that I'll talk to in a second about with Dream Grand Prix locations, because, like you say, a lot of these, Qatar, for example, was somewhere they were trying it out to see if they wanted to go there in the future, and you had that a lot in the 2020 season because of the unique nature of the season itself. You had double headers in some places. You went back to a couple of tracks like Turkey and Germany that you wouldn't have gone back to otherwise. So it was interesting to see this, and I think having some one-off events is not necessarily a bad thing. So maybe don't get rid of Baku, but you pair it with something. It's kind of, you see towns in England twinned with some random town in South America or something. It's like, yeah, if we're not going to go here, we're going to go
Yeah, I
here,
think that,
and we'll have a switcheroo about it, and that way you can open up F1 to other places and incentivize them to get their tracks up the Grade One spec, and you can visit some other areas of the world and really make it feel like a global championship. Because, like Formula E in that sense, then your calendar will have probably a few of the same things on there, really, classics, Monaco, Spa, Silverstone, but you will have a bit of variety in there, and I think, especially in a championship year like this one, for example, if we're going to get that next year, at least if we have some new tracks or some different tracks in there, yes, Red Bull still might run away with it, but it's less of a guarantee because we've maybe not been here in either a while or ever. And there's just that extra
and
little bit of hope that maybe will crush us when it comes to Sunday, but we'll have a bit more of it anyway.
exactly, and that's why 2020 for me as well was a very good season. Yes, Hamilton was very dominant. Mercedes produced one of the most dominant cars in history. Maybe not, and certainly not actually. I'll say certainly not on this point. Certainly not as dominant as the Red Bull we're seeing, but certainly you knew pretty much going into every weekend they would win. But because of the nature of the tracks we were going to, we went back to Turkey, fantastic race. We went back to the Nürburgring, and they had to really fight for these victories because in a few of these cases, such as the Nürburgring, there was a completely washed out Friday. We hadn't been there since 2013, and basically none of the drivers, barring Hamilton, I think, Raikkonen, for
Alonso wasn't
example,
there
at the
yet.
time. Alonso wasn't there, and
Vettel,
maybe
maybe.
Ricardo, Vettel, yeah. But 7 years is a long time to be away from a circuit in essentially completely new cars. They had no data, and the races were actually quite good. Like Portugal, the opening lap in Portugal was one of the best opening laps I can ever remember. They had no data on the tyres. It started to rain. It started to, blow an absolute hoolie out there. It was really windy on the Algarve coast. You had no idea what was going to happen. And I think currently variety is the spice of life. Like you say, it'd be great to sort of spice up a few of these events, but you can't negate and certainly get rid of the classic tracks because they essentially are the DNA of F1. So, like Azerbaijan, give it a couple of years off, bring it back. Maybe they can make some improvements, and then it might be also a wake up call for some of these circuits. Right, you got 2 years off, come back and show us what you're made of. I think that would be quite a good idea as well.
What can you do to really sell this to try and, if you don't like the fact that you're on rotation now with another circuit, what can you do to persuade them to put you back on there? Because you need to then up the ante, and that's, well, yeah, aside from the obvious of just giving more money, but
I mean that normally works in these cases. But
here's a brown paper bag. I hope this is appealing enough to you. But if we go onto the Dream Grand Prix location there, as you say, add some spice into this and make it a bit more interesting. We've both got three ideas of where we'd like to see F1 in the future. We've probably got way more than that, but we've limited it to three just for the sake of this. Otherwise, we will be here all evening. And I'll kick things off.
And the pub, don't forget the pub's also got to close as well, so we can't be here all evening.
Well, it's my pub, Jacob, so it's open as long as I damn well want it.
Well, we can have a lock in then, but we'll keep that
there we
quite
go.
quiet.
I'll kick things off and then throw it to you. We could go back and forth there. But first on my list, just because we went there in the 50s and we haven't been there since, and it just sounds right as a name. I will yet again go on this one. Casablanca Grand Prix. Go to Morocco. Would that not just be so much fun?
Morocco is a location I've never been to. I'd love to go to Morocco. Great culture, great food. I mean, I love my food as well. Certainly, that got that Mediterranean, but Northern African influence with it. There's great weather there. There's great beaches. There's great people. And F1, to be a global championship, as we've mentioned before, needs to have a race in Africa, which I'll get onto as well in a minute. We haven't had a race in Africa since 1993, and what better way to get back onto the calendar in Africa and sort of create a new fan base is to have it in a location which is, I think, favourable for quite a lot of parties as well. You can have a lot of European fans travel down. There's certainly a lot of air routes that you can take there to Northern Africa, and it just has a really nice ring to it, doesn't it? You know, think about this. You know,
It's got a little bit of history with it as well, so you can have these random stats on the opening credits of last time we had a fastest lap. It was in 1952, and it was Fangio that did it. It's like you can't really do that too often.
40. Yeah. No, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
look at who got pole position last year. If you go there 2 years in a row, it's like Verstappen, Hamilton, Fangio. It would look fun and
It
just a
would
bit
look
different there.
very.
So
I don't think they show any highlights on the pre-race
no,
sort of monologue there. They probably don't have any, but
here's a
yeah,
photo.
it's got the
That's the
history.
best we can do.
Yeah, it's something in black and white. Yeah, I think it rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Casablanca, what a romantic name, fantastic name. I
It
think
writes
I would
itself, really.
love to see it actually. Maybe I was thinking sort of Northern Africa, but I didn't want to steal your thunder because I know you love it so much. But I'm in an absolute agreement there that though it's not on my list of my list of three, I certainly would love to see a race in Northern Africa and especially Casablanca there.
So you've gone for your first suggestion. One Grand Prix that we've had before, but only ever so briefly, but there's potential room for it again.
India, yeah, I've gone for India. I think it's maybe a market that F1 hasn't tapped into. Certainly in the newer era, we were there in 2011 to 2013. Never really took off, probably because I don't know, maybe enough money wasn't put into it. I don't know. I think there was a problem there with the government at the time that they didn't want to fund it because of tax reasons, or there was some dispute about money, as there often is with these sort of things. I think there's a billion people plus in the sort of southern Asian continent, southern Asian region there. We've seen a few drivers come through. Obviously, Karim Chandok was Indian. You've got Johan de Reuvelin now, so there is scope
Mainly
for talent. Sorry.
Pushmani as well. It's
Yeah,
you're going to
yeah,
eclipse Derivla these days.
yeah. I think he does. Drew is sort of not maybe achieving what he wanted to do, but I think there is the scope there for F1 to go and visit. F1 likes to go to sort of races as well. India is certainly a country that I would love to visit. I do have plans to visit there quite shortly, actually, and I think it would just be good. I mean, I love the Indian culture. They're very much into their sport. If you know a lot of history about their sport, once they get into sport, they're very much passionate about it. Cricket, they're so passionate about cricket, they sort of treat their cricket players like gods. So I think that if you manage to get an Indian driver on the grid, it might be a case of like we see with Verstappen, for example. If we manage to get an Indian driver on the grid, then maybe one day we'll see it again. I don't know if it was the bravest choice because we've been there before, but it's certainly somewhere I would love to
It
go
makes
back
sense
to,
though.
just because I think that part of the world just seems a bit neglected, like Africa from F1. There's no race in that continent. Oh, continent's still part of Asia, but you know what I mean. That subsection of Asia. There's no race there. I think it'd be nice to sort of go there, and yeah, I'd love to go back to India. Actually, the track wasn't too bad. It actually grew on me from 2011 to 2013. It's actually a bit of an underrated track. I think maybe with these new rules, the tracks that favour the new rules, for example. So there was certainly some different racing lines around that track. It was a wider track, not like the Zandvoort, where it's quite narrow. So India was my first choice, and yeah, I'd love to go back there.
So me second choice there. I've kind of gone for a possible suggestion for if we did have Mexico on rotation. Where else could we go? Stick in Central Southern America. There's so many options there. I was toying with Costa Rica and Uruguay, and maybe add those to the list of a rotation. But I've put Chile down as the one there, just because there is a little bit of history, I think, F1 wise there as well. But it's again so long ago that it's virtually non-existent if it does exist at all. And I just think the Chilean Grand Prix it just sounds nice as well, and opens up South America a bit more, which I think is very much necessary and is a topic of which I will be talking about more about on this pub chat series with people from there. So Chile for me, it's potential opening of a door down there, and why not? Again, it's just I just wanted something different, and you think, well, where haven't we been either in a very long time or ever? And Chile is just again, it doesn't need to sell itself as a country. It's Chile. If you don't know about Chile, Google it. It's gorgeous. End of story. So great wine, great culture. There you go. Just have a Chilean Grand Prix.
I was so was sold on the great wine there, team. You don't need to go any further than that. But Chile, I do agree with you as well. South America needs a Grand Prix. We've had Brazil for many a year now, over a couple of circuits. We used to have Argentina, which wasn't the best circuit, to be honest, back in the 90s. So no surprise, really, with that one. But there's no F1 history, actually, with Chile. I think they had a Formula E race, maybe. You might want to
Possibly, yeah, that
correct
might
me
be
on
what I'm
that.
thinking of.
I think they did. But yeah, they've never had an F1 race there, but I think it taps into more of a different side of South America. Yes, we go to Brazil, and Brazil is a massive part of South America, but it's the one that everyone thinks of. It's the biggest country in South America. It has the most people, the highest GDP, for example, in South America. I think it would be nice to tap into those countries that maybe need a bit more tourism to sort of to boost them up a bit. Peru would be a great Grand Prix location for me as well, and Costa Rica. Actually, I think Costa Rica would be amazing. The wildlife we have there and stuff. I think it'd be a great sort of tourism location and a destination race for Liberty as well, considering they love them so much. But yeah, I really do agree with Chile. There was actually the talk of a Caribbean Grand Prix in Colombia. I think that's sort of been thrown onto the
Yeah,
carpet
that's
now.
been muted a bit now, hasn't it, though?
Yeah, which Colombian Grand Prix wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world. Don't know why. I think because of the Caribbean Sea, they called it the Caribbean Grand Prix, but that was probably more of a marketing ploy to, hey, look, we've got a race in the Caribbean. It's not the true Caribbean, but yeah,
There's potential
yeah, I
there
can't.
anyway, but in
There
terms
is.
of other places as well, you said you didn't want to steal my thunder with Casablanca, so you went for a different African project there that you wanted to go for there. Did you have what a specific one in mind, or were you just
I
thinking generally it would be nice to have just
uh,
somewhere in
I'm
Africa?
thinking more west coast of Africa, maybe sort of the Ivory Coast, maybe down towards
Okay.
Senegal, that kind of location. I think by an African project, I think that we need to get F1 in Africa again, but we need to take time about it. I know they've tried to rush through South Africa, Kyle Lamy onto the calendar. I think there's been some problems there around corruption and government fees and stuff like that. It doesn't look like it's
So
going
South
ahead now, but
Africa being South Africa, yeah.
yeah, basically South Africa being South Africa, not much more needs to be said there. I don't think it's the best circuit, and I think F1 could do better
It,
than
it,
that.
it
I
it
think
seems like a bit of a cheating way of counting Africa as your thing. You're just like, oh yes, we'll go here because we've been here before. It's the easiest way to do it, and there we go, box ticked. Whereas not necessarily Casablanca, but if, like you say, Senegal, Ivory Coast, or Kenya, or even if we go to the east of it, there's a lot of just again, it goes into the unknown a bit.
and by my African project, I mean, go out to these countries, do a recce on sort of the countries where we could put the Grand Prix, maybe put it next to a residential hub and things like that. Let's create jobs for people out there. Let's create
Hmm.
livelihoods within motorsport. Let's create jobs at the track. Let's create motorsport startup initiatives. Let's mechanical engineering schemes, this sort of thing. Take 5 years, go and research a country and think, where could we really make a difference in Africa? And that would be a great legacy project for F1. A good news story for F1, which they need. And
And
it's not
F1,
just
if you're listening and you need two people to go and do this research for you, Jacob and I are available. We offer very reasonable rates and are more than happy to do this for you if this is something you're interested in.
yeah, we'll send you our list of free dates very shortly, and we will be over there in no time. Yeah, I think we need to go to Africa. It's a pressing matter for F1 to be a global championship. Formula E, I think, goes to Africa. It's been South
Been to
Africa,
Cape
but yeah,
Town, yeah. We
yeah,
went to I think they went to Morocco actually last year, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's kind of they're teasing with it.
they are teasing it. I'm actually quite glad in a way, like I said before, we're not going to South Africa because I think F1 could do better than that, and it just seemed like a let's
It,
get
it, it
rich
seems like
quickly.
the calendar
You
for
know,
next year. It's like here's some minimal changes we've made. Let's see if we can get away with it, and hopefully we can, so we don't have to really try hard at this.
and yeah, there's not actually many changes apart from the few date change. It's the first calendar I can remember in a long, long time that doesn't contain a new venue, which is kind of weird because normally every year we've got this race to try out like Vegas later on. We don't know what that's going to be like. Obviously, the asterisk for next year is going to be is, will China actually happen? So we might actually be down to 23, which I suppose a little bit of good news, really. Though I wouldn't mind to see China. Anyway,
Yeah,
that's sort of going off.
that's a separate thing, yeah. But last one on my list is New Zealand, just because you're down in Australia. It seems mean to leave New Zealand out, and with McLaren's heritage there and just how well they're doing now, potentially, if we could build that forward, it would make more sense. And just really, I mean, the Aussies, they have to get up so early or late to watch a Grand Prix anyway. At least give them a second one nearby enough that it's not going to totally ruin their weekend in terms of their sleeping patterns. So I think as well, it's just another one of these beautiful countries where there's a lot of potential there, and why wouldn't you? It seems like just again make it global, and it seems weird. Like, yeah, we got New Australia. Why do you need to go to New Zealand? It's not exactly going much further, but it's like no, but it highlights that area of the world, and it shows that you're committed to it, and not just as a one-off. How many New Zealand drivers have we had in motorsport just generally? Never mind Formula One. It's obviously an important place for, and we get a lot of good quality drivers out of there. So reward them with a Grand Prix. Doesn't matter if it's necessarily a street circuit or a track race for me. It just seems maybe a track just because we have a street circuit already in Australia. But again, for me, it just yeah, Australia and New Zealand. Then you can bung it together with China, Japan, India, and that just feels like and Singapore. Throw that in, obviously, as that needs to be in that category anyway of where they place them on the calendar. And you've just got a really nice set of races there, and you're like, ooh, what are you doing this weekend, Jacob? I'm going to watch the Grand Prix. Where is it? New Zealand. Where are you watching the Grand Prix this week? India. Ooh, where is it? Singapore. Nice. And it's a night race. Interesting. There's some fun there. Maybe I'll watch that Formula One thing.
It sort of jumps up the screen at you, doesn't it? Yeah, the New Zealand Grand Prix, it just sounds big, it sounds proper. And New Zealand, in a way, could be sort of a sleeping giant within motorsport. They've had a world champion, Denny Holm, I think in 1967, if I'm correct, was a Formula One world champion. How many countries on the list I'm looking at now for the 24 races have a world champion? Belgium, hasn't had a world champion, I don't think. Hungary's never had a world champion. What else in there? Azerbaijan, I don't think they're world champion. Singapore
has Bahrain, no. Saudi Arabia, no. China, no. America, no, okay, yes, but still. We've got Spain, yeah, okay. Austria, yeah, fine. But Belgium, yeah. Azerbaijan, Singapore, Mexico, Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi. There's reasoning right there.
And, we've had, hopefully, Liam Lawson, we get him on the grid as well. And we've had Brendan Hartley recently, who's done some amazing things now in sort of endurance cars as well. So there is an appetite there, I think, and it's something that should be looked into. I don't know if there's a track over there that we could use. Hopefully we don't do another bloody street circuit. But if we had the funding there, grade 1 circuit, I'd be all up for that, and let them have a reasonably start, an early start or a reasonable start time for them over in that part of the world, because they've only got Australia, bless them, and Japan. So let them have another race in that part of the world. It can only do no harm, and I'd be very much up for seeing that, actually. And that
was your final one on the list. Yes, I was going to say you've got a very interesting choice for your last one on the list there.
I've got a very interesting choice, and I was tossing up, and a few countries we could go to. Potentially back to South Korea, potentially some other countries in that area as well. But if we're going to do America, which we are going to do now, Liberty Media have got their clause involved, and it's going to be a heavy American influence on the series. Cough, cough, let in Andretti very soon, please. We need proper American tracks in that case if we want to get the fans on board. I was looking through some viewing figures earlier, doing some research for this, and the Miami Grand Prix, I think, had a severe reduction in viewership this year from the American audience over there on NBC or ESPN. I think they have it on, actually.
Yeah.
Why was that? Was that because the track isn't so good? Probably. I don't think that even the American, they love
it. It's a boring race.
America's a racing country. We've got the Indy 500, which for me is arguably the best or the biggest race in the world. I don't want to upset anyone with that, but I think it's the biggest race in the world. You've got,
it's definitely up there. It earns its place in the Triple Crown. That's the diplomatic way if we could put that to save your bacon there.
Yeah, you'll find the real answer on another pub episode. What is the biggest race in the world? But yes, America's a racing continent. It has, we've had American world champions in F1. We've had a whole string of races there in the past. Most bad, not so good. Think Caesar's Palace, think Detroit, very bad circuits. It just seemed to dumb down, the American audience as well. If I need to do a bit more research on this, actually, do they enjoy those tracks? Probably not. And I think we need to go to some real tracks, and I'm going to cut this a bit short here, but let's go to some proper tracks like either Laguna Seca or Road America. And both, for me, very different tracks, but tracks that aren't too different, especially Road America, from sort of the classic European heartland tracks. We've seen some great racing there. I mean, you've got the corkscrew turn at Laguna Seca, sorry. It'd be akin to the shots we see of cars going up Eau Rouge. It'd be the shot of the season. Wow, Timo, how good would it be?
It is essentially America's answer to what if you went down Eau Rouge instead of up it, isn't it?
Yeah, it would be that wow moment. We've seen when cars, I mean, we're going to see it this weekend. When cars go up Eau Rouge, that is going to be, up to Radion. That is one of the pinnacle of the sport. When they go around the Parabolica at Monza, Maggots and Beckett's at Silverstone. Laguna Seca would be up there for me as one of the highlights of the season. And we've never had it in F1. We've had it in MotoGP, for example. We've had it in IndyCar. But yeah, for me, if we're going to do America, we need to do it properly. And Liberty Media, if you're listening, put one of these two tracks on there. Pretty please. And thank you very much.
So on that kind of optimistic note, I think we leave it there before we stray into territory that we don't want to get ourselves back out of again, because it will just be too difficult. So I will say that is all we've got time for this edition of On the Kerbs Pub Chat. But I do think those are 6 tracks that, at the very least, should be attempted to be put on the calendar at some point. 2 in Africa, even just on rotation. At least 1 more in South America, New Zealand, another in America, but make it proper to get rid of Miami or Vegas and give us a proper track. And then you've also got, what did we have? India. Well, yeah, of course we had India. So it makes perfect sense there to really rejuvenate those areas and again make it feel like a global calendar. And I think that's what we want here the most. I think, and feel free to disagree with me if you want as the final point for this, but if we're going to have 24, 25 Grand Prix on the calendar, can we have be a proper global calendar? Because it feels like of the 24, 4 of them are in the Middle East, 3 of them are in America. So that already takes a sizable chunk out of the total number already. So dumb down the numbers a bit. If you're not going to cut the numbers, at least go somewhere new.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I think that we have, got the European heartlands, of course. They're the sort of traditional elements of the sport. We can't really lose them. We can, like we said before, we'll cut down a couple of them. We will cut down America maybe by 1 or rotate some of them. We've got too many in the Middle East, get rid of one of them. And we've still got, Japan, we've got China, we've got Singapore in the Far East. But then, like I said, we've got nothing in the sub-Asian continent around Africa, Pakistan, Bangladesh. We need a race there. So if we are going to have those races, I do agree with you on this point. If we're going to have these races, give us a race to give us a flavour of every point of the globe. Because right now we've got 24 races and we don't even have a race in Africa. So it just seems a bit ridiculous, to be honest. But yes, I do agree with that point. Yeah.
We will leave it there. If you want more from Jacob and I, do keep coming back regularly to this particular watering hole, and at least one of us will probably be here chewing the fat with each other, or some other regulars that will flock here from all over the globe, because there is definitely more of that on its way. If you want even more of us away from the pub, however, which, I mean, okay, I guess, and we do have stuff for that, details of where you can find the pair of us will be in the description below, so do check that out. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and on socials, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Jacob, shall we go and grab another pint?
Same again.